some of you are here because you're not using this stuff there. All right, we'll try to run this from the remote for now. I hate being confined, so I'm going to try not to fall off the stage. This has been known to happen at RTC. So first we're going to start with some new features rundown. That's really why you're here, or what you're advertising. And if you look at the PowerPoint, you know what else is kind of coming, or look at the handout, I should say. I'll focus on Revit. I'll talk about some things that you might care about from an AEC perspective about some of the other software. I'm certainly not doing an exhaustive list of all the software new features that are out there for things that are included in the Building Design Suite Ultimate, because this is a 75-minute presentation. And then I want to talk a little bit about implications of what's coming. So the Industry Collections, if you haven't heard, we'll kind of briefly run that down, and then what that means in terms of just giving you access to more software for those of you that buy software to the traditional suites and that manner. If you saw some of the things, you're getting highlights of this throughout the event. So if you saw some of the things Anthony was talking about today, and then you'll see more from Harlan tomorrow. So we got a lot going on. So first, Revit 2017. This is a sort of blast list, which includes some of the stuff from 2016 R2. Right, we're starting to blend the releases together a little bit. There's really, I don't want to call it an urgency, but a desire within Autodesk to release features a lot more frequently than we do. The challenge being that because the software is still structured on annual releases, it's been a real challenge. And so the best we've been able to do so far is have like a second release mid-year, or in some cases in years past we've had 3 releases a year. But we'd love it to be, like Windows Update or something where it's just updating all the time. That's a challenge that we're still kind of working out and will kind of evolve over the next few years. But this is the stuff we can talk about for subscription customers from the second half of 2016 that rolled out R2, and then the 2017 initial product release. And of course, there are likely to be more features that roll out during the year this year. So let's kind of break that down by discipline just a little bit. I want to talk about architects first, but we lump in all of the generic revenue features that everybody wants with that for whatever reason, and I'm brazenly stealing from some of our marketing folks in the way that they package this, but that's what RTC is all about. So here we go to Kahoot. I'm going to go back to that poll and ask you the next question. So if we let that open, I want to know who cares about architectural features here and why. Hopefully you let that open. You can just check the box. You guys haven't used this before, by the way. It's like a teaching tool. It's totally free, so it's really easy to use this. It takes you seconds to build a poll. Okay, so we've got some folks that are focused around the architectural stuff, and then we've got maybe some engineers or just general BIM management folks that that put them in there as kind of being just about as important as everything else. That's cool. Kind of expected. One of the showy features that's been requested for a long time is depth viewing. In fact, I knew a very large architecture firm. This might sound silly to those of you that implemented Revit a long time ago, but one of their entire schools, one of their entire divisions of their company would not implement Revit for a number of years because it didn't have depth viewing, because their elevations didn't automatically indicate how far away you were. So that is there now. Has anybody tried this out? Okay, it's a pretty simple feature. There was a question, Scott and I were in a discussion where it was like, hey, do we roll this out right now, or do we package it later? I'm like, are you kidding me? Roll this thing out right now. It's 5 years overdue. So this allows you to just very quickly in the graphics display options set it up so that you're obviously able to fade out what's in the background. It does kind of rasterize that output, of course. That's just the way it works, so kind of keep that in mind. If you've been here for cool, railings and fences types of presentations before by people like Marcelo, you know that there were some limitations, not all of which have been resolved with using complex surfaces and things like railings, but in 2017, we are able to at least follow certain types of edges, which does add a lot of flexibility. If you haven't been using Format, please think about it. I could go into an hour. There was a workshop yesterday that Tom Villaro ran. I could talk to you for an hour about why this is a better workflow to go straight into Revit from a conceptual design perspective. You can run dynamo scripts inside of Format. You can perform inside of 360-based energy analysis, which we'll talk about in a second, directly from Format. But when you save a Format model, it saves A360 in the cloud, it's automatically converting that to a Revit native mass, so you're continuing to work instead of throwing it away. So it's a really cool thing. The Format 360 converter is an add-in that sits inside of Revit. that we released in the second half of last year for this version of software. We kind of updated it as we went along. And it allows us to either bring in SketchUp content into Format, which then of course means going into Revit through the process I just talked about, or you can bring in your Revit component families, ones that are not hosted at this time, but this will only get stronger over time. Bring those component families in, it kind of gives you the cartoon version in Format. Those automatically map back to the real families in your library when this thing converts back to Revit. So what we're doing is getting one step closer to the real process, which is, I have somebody who's probably not a Revit user doing some conceptual design on the front end. They are handing that over the wall, so to speak, to the people who actually produce this, namely some of you guys. At some point, that person's going to want to influence the design again, that senior design or whatever. We want to be able to basically flow the model back and forth, right? Whatever the Revit model is. And so this is the first step to do. Insight 360 is a repackaging of all of our energy analysis tools in a new way that makes it a lot more seamless. Anthony talked a little bit about even trying to run back and forth. In other words, not pushing out a concept for Insight 360 to analyze, but for, in fact, Insight 360 analysis to be driving the design from the beginning. But what you have to understand about this is, just to kind of plug some of the work that's happened here, is that a couple of years ago, Autodesk rewrote Energy Plus for the federal government, 400,000 lines of code that we rewrote into a language that people understand because it was in Fortran and nobody speaks that anymore. And so we did that, and then a couple of years ago, after that, we put it in the cloud, so it's much faster. And so we're developing that for the DOE. We also have written about 17 releases of the DO2 format for the DOE, so we're actually doing all the development for energy analysis tools that are used today underneath the hood. And so our tools take advantage of that. So now when you're inside 360 and you're doing heating and cooling loads calculations out of Revit, you're pushing a button that's running in Energy Plus Cloud, which is something we authored for the DOE, and you're getting that information very quickly. And then for some of our other whole building energy analysis, it's running on DO2. If you need more info on that, we've got lots more we can talk about. Global parameters. I'm trying to think of when we first. A lot of this stuff to me has been out for a while. It's because of events we've attended in the past where we were kind of rolling this out to a test group of customers. But global parameters allow us to just basically map parameters across the project without respecting categories, right? So if you want to have cross-category parameters for the sake of just tying elements together that are otherwise unrelated, global parameters enable that. There's a lot more I could say about this. Kind of a topic that needs examples, but if you guys have questions about global parameters, please talk to Scott or myself after the session. Scott, you think of any good examples you've seen of people using this right now?
The one that we're displaying at our booth, so after this you can obviously go over and talk to us at the Autodesk booth. There's one that we set up global parameters that when you actually change one, stretch a wall, the room size is set by square footage. So the other walls adjust, but not only that, the furniture layout, the array of chairs in this room actually automatically adjusts too. So you imagine laying out something like an auditorium like this. As you move the wall in, maybe it takes these tables and then rearranges them into a different array automatically. That's all done with global parameters.
Yeah, so you're building relationships across the project between things that would otherwise not have that relationship. And that's something that shared parameters doesn't really do. Shared parameters might allow us to think about some things in the schedule. Yeah.
Does that work across Expert?
Does it work across what?
Linked models.
Oh, linked files?
Yeah.
Is it extras? I thought we were
I
talking
don't know why.
It's a great question. I don't know. Let's take that over to the booth and we can run it by Heather or one of the other people.
Let's try it.
Find out.
Yeah, okay, we'll move on. So there's some stuff that's not sexy but important. There's a lot of background performance improvements, and a lot of that resulted from our team over the last few years. If you guys have been using Revit, by the way, for a number of years, 2014 much better than 13, 15 much better than 14, 16 much better than 15, 17 much better than 16 in terms of performance. There's the way one of our programmers put it, and it's just kind of funny to me because it's so pragmatic. It's just like, yes, we're decoupling scale models from performance. It's just like that. That's not a trivial thing to say, that you just don't care what the model size is, it's going to perform. But one of the things they're doing to help us there is just not have it do stuff that doesn't matter. So, in other words, don't draw the things that are hidden. Just things that software can be smarter about. So these kinds of things are making Revit perform faster. You can see just by chart. I haven't get into detail of the chart. The performance improvements are significant. To be able to spin around, 1 gig models and have it just kind of smooth is powerful stuff.
Yeah, and I talk to customers about that. I say upgrade to 2017 for no other reason I mean, you're talking about a bunch of great features this year, but speed alone is totally worth the upgrade.
Yeah, Aaron Mallard, people know Parallax, but know Aaron from past life. He was pretty much, we'll tell it like it is. He was like, I need this like yesterday when he was his first
Right.
tweet when he saw this.
Go see Aaron's setup to it. He's got some computers running. He's got one of his previous employer, Becker, a huge model. He's got every single thing turned on, down to like he modeled outlets, you know, full-blown outlets, not
Manufactured
like yes. And he turned the whole entire thing on and spin around like it's 4 walls of roof. Right. So pretty sweet.
Not necessarily on service book, but.
Yeah.
Autodesk is, so we have a relationship with Metal Images and Metal Ray, and so that relationship is maintained in 3ds Max. We have Metal Ray as a renderer in Max, but we've actually been working for a few years on a background renderer that's faster and better in terms of more physically accurate lighting than Metal Ray. That's become the standard backbone engine in all of Autodesk products as of this year. So we kind of had a split persona there where you could run Metal Ray or you could run a ray tracer in past years, and now it's just becoming the default engine. And it's fast and it's more physically accurate, but you might also ask, well, why is that important? Because we're all rendering in the cloud now. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. I feel like people should be. But really, it's unifying our engines across all of our platforms in a way that we don't have to respond to an outside third-party renderer, but also performs better. And then it's more similar in terms of the way it functions to our cloud-based rendering tools, which are highly optimized rendering tools already. So this just works better.
And in full also, I don't think it's that way yet, but our cloud renderer will be this ARC ray tracing engine at some point. So they render in Revit or you render in the cloud, they will be identical. I know they're not currently yet today, but that's the plan.
Yeah, with the challenge being that we've largely addressed, but still continue to work on, that materials across every single product become the same thing, right? That's been, as you know, if you had to roll out Revit each year and then review your libraries, that's been a significant thing because we've had to go through several steps to get there. We had really robust materials from a graphics perspective and things like Max, and from a lighting perspective, but we didn't have some of the data that's carried in Revit. Revit carries physical properties that then communicate to things like structural analysis tools that are not relevant or understood by something like Max in the past. And so being able to pull all of that together and have kind of one engine that understands and unifies them all is powerful. This is big news. It's just we've been working on it forever. So like the #1 requested list, feature on Augie's list for like 7 years is a text editor. And we had a gunslinger type of event we call Inside the Factory Live now, but we had an event where we were saying, okay, so we think we're ready. We've like basically taken WordPad and dropped it into Revit. And so that's effectively what it's doing. It's like, here's the thing, it's going to break your text because it measures text differently. So if you upgrade a project, expect kind of wonky stuff to happen. Is that okay? And the answer was completely yes, unanimous. Yes, please get this done. So it's a one-time, messing with your old projects as you update it. But it does measure text the way AutoCAD measures text now, so people get what they expect to get on a sheet. It also has the functionalities, as I said, with WordPad, so it essentially is incorporated that way. It doesn't mean it's done, but it means we've migrated the engine. This was a big deal, not just because it's taken so long, because it was just terrible every time we tried to do it before, but it's one of the last core things of Revit that we had not rewritten. See, there were some things that were real easy to change when Autodesk acquired Revit, and then there are some things that were inside the core, and those things are next to impossible to change. It took a lot of years to rip that out and have it not break everything you guys have done in the new editors.
There's a really good section in the Help File too that explains how exactly text is measured. So if that's something that is concerning to you, it has to do with the serifs and everything else that go with fonts, and so there's a great help section that describes exactly how to measure.
Yes, because if not you, the person who does red lines or whatever in the office will inevitably have questions. Yeah.
How does it work if you have like a spec or something in Word and you copy and paste it in?
It works. Yeah. So you can copy and paste between Word and the new text editor.
But it's not based on Word. It's based on WordPad, and there are some differences in shortcut keys and things between those two programs. So just something to be aware of.
But it won't lose formatting.
No, it won't understand that.
Yeah.
Cool.
For example, what's the thing?
European languages, with Chinese, with Japanese.
Do you want to?
I'm sorry, say that again?
How does it work with not European languages when you have either Chinese, Japanese, Arabic?
Sure. So how does it work with other languages? Not English, right? So Chinese, Arabic, etc. It's a great question. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's support just because it's based on Microsoft technology, but I don't know where the good and bad, like what it does and doesn't do correctly. But I think you should probably ask our development folks.
Yeah, come over to the booth and grab either Harlan or Heather and ask them that question.
They're going to love that question.
Yeah.
What's the first one there? Editing canvas, what's that?
So it basically opens up almost like an editor tool where it lets you kind of go through and continue to edit before you kind of okay out of it. So it takes you out of the work environment in a sense to where you've almost got a, kind of context-sensitive, architectural editing environment and then back.
Here's the one thing that it fixes that everybody hated is you can now scroll in and out all day long while you're editing text and not have to worry about the whole wrapping thing getting screwed up. So
Yeah.
that got a round of applause at the inside the factory.
Because
That's
it's
where it's like if you double click at one zoom level and you unclick, somehow the paragraphs are different.
Yes,
Okay.
that's fixed. You can now be editing text and scroll so far out that you can't see what you're typing any longer. That's what the old thing did, was actually make text presentable so you can see it. So now if you're typing, you zoom way out, you can make your text so small you can't physically see, so you have to zoom back in to see what you're typing. But it won't mess up that zoom scale factor anymore.
So this was obviously a hotly requested item, and it's the first generation of it, but it's a big step.
Does not affect tags yet, right? So it's body text.
Fair point. Speaking of tags, calculations in tags, which is like, I would have loved this when I was in practice a while back. But so finally, we can create or add calculated values into tags, just a little bit smarter each year. Dynamo was available as a plugin for Revit over the years, and now just ships with it out of the box. If you haven't learned about Dynamo, you clearly weren't here yet last year because half the sessions had Dynamo in it. But Dynamo is a significant change to the Revit, or addition to the Revit experience in the sense that without having to know how to write code in the API, you can still access everything that's in the API.
Dynamo had a big event in the last couple of months. Does anybody know what the big event was in the Dynamo world? 1.0. Actual real, not a point.
Legit
something
release.
Yes.
Yeah.
The 1.0 release of Dynamo.
74 releases in, we finally went 1.0. Okay, so that's, and of course Dynamo, I'd love to talk about this more, we've got to move, so huge number of programs that it runs on now, inside and outside of Autodesk. Okay, tangency locks. This is just for when you're sketching, you can lock the sketching line so they don't do all kinds of bizarre stuff as you move around. So it's just a little bit of helpfulness when you're sketching. Scheduling improvements, creating scheduled view templates. You create view templates for everything else. It'd be nice to do that for schedules. And those include a number of parameters, including, and then you see minimum and maximum values for calculations to be displayed. So just another piece of what actually can be reported. Okay, so kind of the general features. Let's move into structural. To do that, let's wake up your phones again. And I want to find out what you care about or don't, so I can decide on a pace for structural. How are we going? I was going to try to mix in a live demo, but it's a little tedious. All right, so some people care, some people don't. We have one structural engineer in the room. So. All right, thank you. I'm a civil structural engineer. I feel you. Right. So,
remember what our keynote said, though? Structural engineers save people every time the wind blows.
Yeah. So, okay, reinforcement connectors. I'm going to go fast, so that's basically what you guys told me. Somewhat important. When we cut bars, we now can drop in couplers as accessories, essentially connections. Variable rebar distribution. So now when I have sloping, as you see there, sloping member or member that's not a uniform size, the strips and so on find their way. It doesn't work for freeform stuff yet, but it does work for these more common types of sections. So we used to have like this, I wouldn't want to show it to you, it's so ugly. We used to have this dialog box that popped up and showed you all of your offsets in terms of rebar constraints, so all of your different cover settings and so on. Now it's in Canvas more like a sketch thing that you can grab and drag and enter with floating information in the canvas, which is just much better. You can now bend fabric sheets. This is cool because you can basically sketch a profile and they follow that, so much more realistic. I think that where it gets real interesting is the beginning of the migration of some of the tools of advanced steel into Revit. And so we have, first of all, the need to define this category about connections in Revit that had no knowledge before. And so now we have, even without the advanced steel part, we had to define something called a generic connection. This can hold information in it that could be then shared. So when you give the Revit model to a detailer, that detailer has information about what that connection is supposed to do, even if you're not going to model anything for them, so at least they have the parameters for design right there instead of having them in some separate report. And it also has the ability, as you can kind of see right there, like showing a status for approval. So you could use that as a workflow if you so chose between a structural engineer and a detailer to say, here's the connection that we want to do, the type it is, somebody approves that or doesn't. But then once you have connections as enabled as a thing in Revit, then you can do what we did here, which is migrate a whole bunch of the connection templates out of advanced steel directly into the Revit environment. So you can install steel connections for Revit. It's a module that you can install off the Exchange. And then now you're able to define connections using a wizard. It's very good stuff. I mean, advanced steel that competes against SDS2 template, the best in the business in terms of steel detailing, and to get some of that functionality in Revit means an engineer doesn't have to just have the generic set of typical details. They can actually embed some real information in there. And very quickly. The key is that you can do 3D connections very, very fast. It does do code checks in terms of like shear pull out, the normal stuff. So it's looking at the connection geometry and saying, okay, that plate can handle that kind of force. Column split tool, kind of like the rebar connectors. We can split a column vertically and then add a connection. So that's just more realistic than what we had before. Improved steel content. I don't need to go into this much other than to say we keep bolstering these tools. What happened was a few years ago we had Revit, Robot, and Advanced Steel all with different libraries. Revit had some things like Bullcraft joist girders that were not inside of Robot, for example. Advanced Steel had a ton of stuff that wasn't in the other two programs. So a couple of years ago, we synced up Revit and Robot. It wasn't sexy, it was all behind the scenes, but like every structural family in Revit was rebuilt 2 years ago, so on the version some of you guys might be running, to include all of the analytical properties that would be needed, as well as all of the kind of snap points that would be used by a detailing software. And then last year, 2016 release, I think, the 2015 or 16, we brought all of this stuff out of the Advanced Steel catalog into Revit and Robot, so that when you go back and forth between these softwares, there's no mapping issues. Because if you don't know this, Revit has bidirectional links with Robot. It's a live design workflow. You don't have to export or import anything. Same thing, Revit can synchronize bidirectionally with Advanced Steel. So and Advanced Steel now, and this year, can synchronize with Robot. So there's kind of a three-way relationship there. Very strong tools, actually. Structural foundations have just improved a little bit. You can attach columns to foundations. So it's basic stuff, but it's stuff that needs to be in Revit. Should have been there before, I think. Okay, MEP. Next, you can kind of see where it's going. Yes, sir.
Did they pull the timber libraries over from Robot?
Timber libraries. I'm not sure, actually. I don't know that. I know that, until, so I don't want to get off topic too much, but Robot has, and we want to talk about Robot a little bit, so let's table that. All right, so I'm taking my time, even though it seems like I'm going fast, I'm taking my time with the Revit stuff. So, next question, as you can imagine, is who cares about MEP? Don, shoot it. Okay, all right, so we got some MEP bands in the room. That's good. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about this. Now, as Desi was saying, I'm an architect and I'm an engineer, but I'm a civil structural engineer, so MEP is not my strongest suit. But what you should know is, for those of you who know the MEP fabrication portfolio, we've been sort of migrating some of that functionality to Revit over the last couple of years, and certainly building the connection stronger between our Revit MEP tool set and our MEP fabrication tool set. One evidence of that in 2017 is that I can take Revit stuff, kind of push a button, not for just anything, but for standard defined components, and we get the MEP stuff out of it automatically, the fabricable stuff automatically. This is something that was demonstrated at a very preview level by Map Software several years ago, right before we acquired them. So we're now starting to see that kind of become baked into Revit, which is cool. It's taking a little while to do it. Okay, there's a lot of intelligence about the standard sections that we buy. I don't want to belabor this, but it's cool that we're getting smarter about understanding here's what can actually be bought and shipped versus here's just design intent. And so some of the things where I'm seeing either automatic standard section links that would populate, or I'm seeing information here about segments that would never be done this way because that's too short. This just doesn't make sense. That there's some intelligence in the program about what's actually fabricable or what would actually be ordered is making its way into Revit. This kind of thing is standard in fabrication software and has not been present in Revit in the past.
So I've got a question.
Yes.
Does it actually create, I believe you get into it with schools and things of that nature now, or is it just putting in the more fabricated parts?
It's more the latter, because the idea is still that you'll push the button and send it into our MEP fabrication software for the purposes of doing that. At least now, what the writing is on the wall, I'm not sure. Okay, so just a number of improvements about routing and filling. So connecting open endpoints, specifying which fittings should be required. There's some. Again, I would just define this as removing limitations. That's probably the way to put it. There have been enough when the MEP fab stuff started to appear in Revit over the last couple of years. It was really only for very basic things, and so by essentially making it more flexible, which is what this is really telling us, we're able to use it for more and more. Things like a trim and extend command, which you just assume exists for everything, did not exist for MEP components, now it does. And then quick connect, you can just grab and stretch fittings together and things connect. It works. Where we broken in the past. You also have better choice of layout, so you can swap fittings before it would give you all kinds of grief. You can pitch elements, you couldn't do that. So this is like reminiscent, for those of you that have been Revit users for a long time, of the P part of MEP early on in Revit, right, where the plumbing was really limited. This is what we're starting to overcome now on the more fabricatable parts, if that makes sense. More hangers, lots of options actually, additional for hangers to make it more realistic this year. We now can do a little bit more in terms of electrical calculations. So you're seeing that just an example here, summing apparent load, as well as two different ways of using some of this. So you have options, control over the options for calculation. We have additional parameters, so temperature difference parameter, pressure drop. Just more of the background data, so not only for fabrication, but also for calculation. Yes, of course, mark values, pipe system volume. So yes, we can now compute pipe system volumes as in the background, so it doesn't slow you down any. And then I mentioned earlier some of the performance improvements, like the fact that it doesn't spend time calculating things you don't see. Well, that has to do a lot with ductwork, right? So it doesn't draw a duct that you don't see. Also, if you zoom out and something is only like one line in terms of what you actually see on the screen, it draws it as one line. And so as you zoom in, it will start to draw it all. But when you have very, very large models, and it doesn't even take very large models, but complex models, as you start to zoom out and it's spaghetti, it's just drawing that as line work because that's all you're looking at anyway. So it's much, much faster with large MEP models. Okay, it's a quick rundown of Revit, just highlights. I'm going to kind of talk about a couple of other softwares, and I'm only going to talk about them very, very briefly, so we can get to the rest of the message. But Navisworks. Navisworks has a 2017 on it, otherwise it's pretty much the same software as 2016, if anybody doesn't know that. Now there is better integration of BIM 360 Glue. We are putting a ton of investment into our BIM 360 portfolio, and what's cool if you're into that or understand what that is that we have all these models living in the cloud in one place. I can open it directly from Navisworks from Glue, do my editing, push that right back, and then use Glue for all of the things that it does, which enables everybody to be notified of everything, track it, and so on. But Navisworks is now connected to that workflow where they were disconnected before. So shared views means that if I have graphics overrides in Navisworks, like from Clash viewpoints and so on, then I can see that stuff in Glue and vice versa. So I can share the views and those graphic overrides back and forth between the, really, who's probably either the construction coordinator, somebody in the GC that is kind of the primary person in charge of project coordination will be using Navis. They're not disconnected from all the folks that are using Glue.
So does that mean that if you have a viewpoint that you create that has the shaded components and the actual highlighted class, that's going to be renamed if you publish it out?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right. So that way I can see that, and if I'm working in Glue, I can see that on my iPad when I'm out in the field, just as I would be seeing it in Navis. Inventor, I'm crossing over the suite, remember? So there's some tools that some of you are like, what is Inventor? And others are going to be like, oh, sweet, what's coming in Inventor? There's a whole lot in Inventor. I'm summarizing a few things that might be relevant to you guys or might not. We have some amazing commands like this 3D transform, the way we can define, like constraints are just so much more advanced than Inventor, I'll be honest, right? And so a curve on a face command, I want to mention this just because if you ever need to make up something out of nothing, Inventor is a good tool to try it out. Shape generator, I mean, some of these things I get jealous that they're not in Revit. So we have the ability, this came online, I think, in the second half of Inventor, like the R2 release for 2016, and has been approved for 2017. But you're seeing the ability to create parts that understand their structural purpose and are structurally efficient just through a dialogue. That's basically what Shape Generator does. Mesh handling, you can bring in meshes into Inventor and it understands them and allows you to then work with them. So that's significant. I mean, to bring a mesh in and display it is one thing. To bring a mesh in and have it be an editable part that works with constraints, that works with clash detection, everything else, that's pretty sweet. But Inventor has things like AnyCAD, where you can bring in anything, SolidWorks, whatever, into Inventor, and then it just becomes a native Inventor object you can work with it, which is really powerful. It's just really good. It's a way to make Inventor competitive in the marketplace. The factory design suite layout, I mentioned this, even though it's about AutoCAD and Navis and Vault, because it's a cool workflow story, and if you're not aware of this, this is a parallel thing that happens to a lot of us in the buildings industry. Or like in my case, if I go talk to an automotive or aerospace manufacturer, they're actually a very large owner that is interested in facility stuff, but they're also doing manufacturing and very concerned with efficiency and optimization. And so there's a lot of crossover between the Inventor type of workflow and the Revit type of workflow, and where those touch points are is a challenge that we were always addressing. But on the factory design side, if you're not aware of this, Inventor is powerful stuff. Like, I mean, the ability to just almost like a play set, plug and play different objects. They can be complex Inventor assemblies and so on, but throw them all together into a plan. And they can use AutoCAD for the people that don't like speak Inventor but want to be able to use this kit of parts to play with stuff. They can use AutoCAD to lay that stuff out. They can manage all the data. Inventor is very tightly integrated with Vault. So it's a whole ecosystem of products unto itself. 3ds Max, huge product, obviously